and then leave you to make objections or questions. As I say, it's one argument contained in my recent book, Are We Bodies or Souls? And it is the defense of the view of Plato and Descartes that humans are essentially souls, essentially in the sense that that's what makes us who we are. We do, of course, have bodies, and they are vital for our well-being. But what makes us who we are is our individual soul. This argument is only an argument for the necessity of the soul for our existence. It is not an argument for the sufficiency of the soul, though I do argue for that also in my book. What I mean by that is I don't argue that the soul can exist on its own without a body in this lecture, but I do argue elsewhere for that. But what I'm arguing here is that the soul is necessary for our existence. I start the paper by describing theories of personal identity. A theory of personal identity is a theory about what it is that makes me, me, that is to say, me, the same person as a certain person 60 or 70 years ago who was a student. It's not I'm not concerned with whether or not I had the same character or the same beliefs. It's a question about who had the same or different character or beliefs. And it's not a question about what causes me to continue to exist, but a question about what my continued existence would consist in. And there have been theories of personal identity since Plato, but the most common ones in the Anglo-American philosophical world are complex theories which analyze personal identity in terms of either physical connection with the earlier person or mental connection with the earlier person. Theories of physical connection explain me or analyze me being a later person in terms of having some of the same physical bits of body or brain. A mental theory analyzes me being the same person in terms of me being able to, apparently, remember what happened to the earlier person and the earlier person's experiences causing me to have that memory. Such theories started as theories about physical theories of this kind, start as theories about the body. They say I'm the same person if I have the same body. But clearly that won't do, because we can have all sorts of bits of the body replaced and superficially it's the same person. Nobody wants to say it's a different person if I have my arm replaced. But of course the brain is rather different. The brain is that on which all our mental life depends. And so more recent theories analyze it in terms of me being the same person as having the same brain. But the same problem arises, how much of the same brain? And we now become rather acutely aware of this problem because, as I pointed out in the paper, our brain consists of various parts, but the top part, the cortex, is what our conscious life or the nature of our conscious life depends on. And we have two cortices, the left and right. And if, unfortunately, someone has to have one of these cortices removed, it doesn't make much difference to what their beliefs and thoughts are. And it doesn't make much difference which of the two cortices is removed. So that opens the possibility that when we learn to transplant parts of the brain, as we should be able to in a few decades' time, that both the cortexes could be taken out of my body and one put into the body of some unfortunate person and the other put into the body of some other unfortunate person, and their original cortex, all of it, removed. And therefore, each of these persons should purport to be me, because all their memories and character and attitude to life would be those of mine. And yet there would be absolutely no experiment which would test which was the case. There are just three possibilities. The one with the on the left is me, and the other one isn't. The one on the right is me, and the other one isn't. Or perhaps the whole operation has the consequence that neither of them are. I've ceased to exist, and no possible operation could show, no possible experiment could show which is the case. All the experiment could show is perhaps one knows a bit more about my past than the other one does, but that doesn't show anything, because clearly this operation is going to make quite a difference to the degree of our memory, and maybe the person who remembers a bit more is not me.
Ничего, он так и не будет быстро откладывать.
Yeah? Sorry, can I continue?
Yes, choose.
Yeah. So various modern theorists, most of them, have wanted to say, well, perhaps our notion of identity is a bit confused. Maybe the truth of the matter is that in that case, both of the subsequent persons are partly me. I have, as it were, become partly identical with one and partly identical with the other. And that appeals to a number of modern theorists, Derek Parfit, for example, and several others. But that doesn't make sense. It's all very well to utter the words, but what would it constitute being partly me? If someone was partly me, suppose I had undergone this operation and two people, one of them and the other of them, they were both partly me, then presumably I would be having both of their experiences, not all of them, but part of their experiences, some of their experiences, or a less vivid form of their experiences, both of them. But clearly that doesn't happen, because there is no one person at the later time who has any of the experiences of the other, any combined set of experiences, as it were. If one of them is going to be happy and the other of them is going to be sad, then that's the only possibility for the future. There is no possibility of there being a person who is both of them. Sorry, I expressed that a bit badly. If it is the case that I am to be split into two persons and they are to be partly me, then it must also be the case that I have part of, or a degree of, or some of the experience. I'm going to have some of the experiences of each. And so there will be a person in the future who has some of the experiences of each. But there will be no person in the future who has some of the experiences of each, because the two persons in the future are quite different from each other. They have different experiences. They don't know about each other's experiences. They leave by the different doors. So it doesn't seem to me to make sense to suppose that I could be partly both of them. Another way of trying to make sense of it is to suggest that what happens to us is like what happens to inanimate things. If my table is divided into two, it's natural to say that each of them is part of the original table. But tables are different from human beings because tables are not conscious and human beings are. And but if we tried to make the analogy of the table appropriate to the case of human beings, what we would have to say is that each of the later person was originally part of me, but they've been separated. And that would mean that I have two parts, and each of these parts is capable of experiencing. But of course, that is not the case. There's only one experiencer at the start. Of course, it may be that my visual experiences are caused by goings on in certain parts of the brain, and my auditory experiences are caused by goings on in some other part of the brain. But it's the same person who has both the experiences, auditory and visual. There is no, as it were, already existing two-partness, which there is in the case of the table. It's just the parts have been separated. But there is no subject of experience who has experiential parts to start with. So none of these theories seem to work. And there is only one. It must therefore be the case that no complex theory will work, because all complex theories are subject to these problems. The first problems being they're arbitrary. Why say that 60% makes me rather than 59% of the previous brain makes it me? And secondly, that they are subject to the problem I have presented, that both any subsequent candidate, if it's someone is only partly me, then someone else can be have the other part of me. But in that case, we've run into the problem which I have described, that there's no real sense to that. So the only alternative is to say that it's all or nothing. Either one of the persons is me and the other isn't, or the other one is, and the first one isn't, or neither of them are. Personal identity cannot be divided. And that brings you to the simple theory of personal identity. The personal identity is all or nothing. But then the problem arises of how do you get from there to saying that my soul is what is responsible for it? And you get there this way. I refer to a principle which I call the principle of the identity of composites. And what I mean by this is if you have a composite thing, And I took the example of a car. It's got various bits to it. It's got wheels, and it's got a body and it's got an engine and so on. And it's standing there in the car park. Now, is it possible that instead of that car, there could be another car which is made of all the same bits, and these bits have all the same histories, but there's a different car instead of it? And the obvious answer seems to be no. Now, coming back to our example of humans, and take the case where my brain is split and one part is put into someone else's left hemisphere. Now, my previous arguments show that even if you know all about the history of this left hemisphere, and if you know all about the memories it has and the memories it did have, and all the bits of it, and their history, it's still open to question whether that is me. So, if all you know about me, about this left-hand person, is simply that it's had a certain history and it's made of these bits, that these physical bits, you can know all that and not know whether it's me. But in the case of the car, if you know all the bits, there's only going to be one possible answer, that it is me. And so, if all the bits there were to me, to the subsequent left-hand person, if all the bits there were to me were these physical bits, and all the properties that these physical bits had were their physical properties and their mental properties of thought and feeling and so on, that's not enough to know which is me, because it's compatible with either that being me or not being me. And what the principle of the identity of composites says is, if those were all the bits and those were all their properties, then there could only be one possibility. That would entail that it was me, that you would know that it was the same person. You would know which same person it was if you knew all the bits. So there must be another bit which makes this one me or not me. And that bit can't be a physical bit, because we know all about the physical bits. And it can't be a property I have of having thoughts and feelings, because we know all about those, and we know they're not what makes me me. So there's only one possibility, that it must be a non-material bit. And that, of course, is what Plato and Descartes said, the soul. It couldn't be the case that two people are equally candidates for being me, as it were, because they have same bits of me and same thoughts, if there was nothing that made them me or made them not me. And so, for that reason, I argue to the soul. Well, that was the structure of my argument. And as you will know, if you know anything about the literature, this is not a popular view these days. Substance dualism, that we consist of two parts. It goes absolutely against most modern philosophical views of the matter. Most philosophers of the Anglo-American tradition, analytic philosophy as it's called, who write about anything concerned with the philosophy of mind, up till 3 or 4 years, up till 3 or 4 decades ago, were physicalists entirely. That they thought not merely that we are just physical things, but all our thoughts and feelings were really physical goings on in the brain redescribed. But that theory is not quite so fashionable now. Among Anglo-American philosophers, some are straightforward physicalists. Others hold the view that our mental properties are distinct from our physical properties. And so our mental events are different from our physical events. And that's known as property dualism. Property dualism says, yes, there are two sorts of event in the world. There are events that consist in physical objects having physical properties and mental objects, and also there are physical objects having mental properties, and that is property dualism. Two sorts of properties, physical ones and mental ones, but only one sort of thing that has properties, me, who am a physical object. At least that is the view of property dualism. But I wish to go further, and going further is to say not merely there are two sorts of properties, but there are two sorts of substance, two sorts of things that have properties, and that is slightly more popular than it was, but not very popular. Just one point of definition: how do we distinguish a physical event from a mental event? And I think there's a very easy way of doing that. Or I would wish to define a physical event as the one to which there is public access. Anyone can find out, as well as anyone else, whether there's a desk here and what shape it has. It's an item of equal accessibility, and that applies to properties. A property is a physical property if it's equally accessible to all. And a thing, a substance, is a physical substance if it's a thing equally accessible to all. And events are physical events if anyone could know about them as well as can anyone else. But a mental event, as I am defining it, is one to which one person has a privileged access which is not available to others. And that applies, that definition distinguishes mental properties from physical properties, and mental events, which consist in something having a mental property, and it distinguishes them from physical events, and it distinguishes substances. A substance is a physical substance if everyone can know about it as well as everyone else. Desk. And a substance is a mental substance if only one person can know about it better than anyone else. And that, of course, I claim is the soul. Right, I have talked enough, and that is the structure of what I have proposed. And I'm sure you all have